Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video we shall talk about glass cannon, and in particular what I call a glass cannon, well, not what I call the glass cannon, but what is an example of glass cannon, in my opinion, is intelligence or intellect, which I would assume to be synonyms in this sense, at the very least, in the context of this video. So what is glass cannon? It's sort of like a fictional trope used in like TV, like fantasy, science fiction, video games kind of environments. So it means something which is very powerful, which can do its work really well, but at the same time it's very vulnerable, right? So it's a cannon, but it's made of glass, right? So, and that's what I think intelligence is. So, without further ado, the main point of this video is that intelligence is the most powerful, yet the most fragile organ of human beings, which potentially can subdue the whole universe, but at the same time, it can be misled so easily. So you can almost say that it's a colossus with feet of clay, you know, alluding to this other biblical metaphor. Well, not other, just biblical metaphor. So, yeah. So this is the main point of this video, and we'll ruminate on that a bit more further. So, I've already mentioned that intelligence seems to be, well, maybe I haven't, but it seems to be the newest acquisition, right, of human beings with respect to the other species on this planet at the very least. And hence, since it's newest, it's also the most dangerous in a way, because it's the least tested, right? It's the newest, or at least it appears to be so. And hence, it can bring forth into reality, through hyper-reality, if you know what I mean, ideas that can easily wipe out entire populations of human beings or other species, anyways. And there's still no filter for that, you know. There is no blocking of these dangerous kinds of ideas of whatever sort. So yeah, it's indeed a glass cannon, and if it's used improperly, you can actually destroy yourself with it even, right? It can self-destruct, rather, in a way, I mean. And here I'm actually polemizing, if that's a word in English, I don't know. I don't think there's such a word in English. Well, let's say I'm arguing or debating with Nietzsche, who've actually said at some point in one of his books, I don't remember which one, so he said, not exactly quoting, obviously, just getting the gist of it, that basically our mind, like our spirit, if you wish, is already refined enough that anything that could have been too dangerous has already been rooted out, like all these too dangerous types of brains, let's say, died out already, okay, because they were too dangerous, so they didn't survive to this day. So I'm kind of disagreeing, at least partly, because while I agree that maybe some of the most dangerous stuff have disappeared, still the progress allows even less dangerous stuff to become much more dangerous, etc., etc. So it's kind of, I don't know, 50-50 here, in my opinion. So yeah, but at least I think Nietzsche himself would have agreed, and maybe he actually talked about this somewhere, that still the mind is the most dangerous thing in a human being, the least tested thing, right? So, the least reliable, let's say, thing. So, and again, the latest events, like literally in the last, 10 years, let's say, have shown how vulnerable mind is, like how defenseless it is. And by latest events, I mean, obviously, like things like Brexit, like American elections. Well, those are obviously the most like famous ones. And here I want to test my new invention. It's a bit of an intermission. I'll continue in a few minutes. So hear me out. This, there's alphabets called abjads, which don't have vowels, and there are like true alphabets which do have vowels, right? It's arguably like whichever appeared first. Maybe abjads appeared first, but at least they are pretty ancient, right? Or pretty old, let's say. If you it's actually kind of curious how you can actually read the text. It's kind of harder in English. It's very easy in Russian, for example. Like I've tested it many times myself on my friends and stuff. Like you can write a text without vowels and it will be like almost perfectly understandable. And it looks almost like a miracle, right? So what I'm trying to do just for fun actually, but I mean, why not, is to trick the algorithms, of all these woke media by using like abjad type of writing of all the, forbidden terms. So let's see whether the algorithms can sort of backwards engineer the thought process, so whether they can devolve into abjad type of writing without vowels, right? So again, returning to what I was talking about. So I mentioned Brexit and elections, and then obviously the most modern type of issue is CRNVRS, and that's not carnivores, okay, and VCCNS, which is more understandable. It's an abjad type of terminology, right? So these are the newest instances of let's say, illustrations of how defenseless and vulnerable mind is. Then we have all the woke terrorism, all the new socialistic tendencies. I mean, they aren't so new, but they've accelerated definitely in recent years, etc., etc., things like that. So yeah, we've definitely had quite a few examples recently. And yeah, and just a few more illustrations. Like, as I've said, we're just gonna ruminate on this main point that I've made at the very beginning. Again, I've already quoted it somewhere, but I still like this quote, so I'm gonna do it again. It's from the movie Inception, which is a really great movie, which, the protagonist asks there, like, what is the most resilient parasite? Like a bacteria, a virus, blah, blah, blah. An idea, he says. An idea is the most resilient and highly contagious, right? So, and by the way, look up my video, CRNVRS and culture. And again, it's not carnivores. I'll give all the links in the description as usual. Because in this video, I particularly mentioned how it is our mind that is actually infected at the moment. Back then, at least, it was the case. Right now, it's not so much the case anymore, but it's still, I mean, in net sense, it's still the case. Like, the minds are infected to a much higher degree and with a much more horrible consequences than anything else that happened thanks to not carnivores. Okay, so yeah. So why is the idea the most resilient parasite and the most and highly contagious? Well, it's because, again, the mind is the ultimate host, right, for this parasite. Oh, it's actually the ultimate host, period, but it happens to be that the idea sort of parasites on the mind, right? So it's a perfect medium for it to exist and to become really powerful, because the mind is very powerful. but it's also incredibly vulnerable, right? So even a stupid idea can contaminate many minds, and the consequences would be really horrible, which is kind of what we observe today, and what we observed like in 1930s and 40s, let's say, and in many other times throughout history. Okay. And we'll probably observe many more times in the future, unfortunately. Yeah. So it's kind of what Harika from Star Control 3 said, that a whisper of doubt grows into a roar until it is all that we can hear, right? Something like that. It's kind of the description of the process of contagion. Is that a verb? Should be a noun. I don't know. Never mind. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. And it's kind of curious. It's actually kind of sad, really, not really curious, to observe how naive ideals of rationality, in this respect, fare against reality. Okay. And it's, I mean, to anyone who is at least a little bit observant and have been following science at least a little bit, it's very clear, I think, that science is irrational, right? Not only science as institution, but even individual scientists, at least as much as they are being part of the institution of science, they are also irrational, and they behave in a rational way. Maybe they are rational per se, but their behavior looks as if they weren't rational, right? So, like, factually, they are irrational. That's what I'm saying. They are kind of rational in the way, if you like, expand the definition of rationality from this very narrow sense to a broader sense, in the sense of will to power, for example. Like, we'll say, like, if we say that whatever increases our power, at least in the given circumstances, is rational, then surely the behavior of scientists is rational. Like, if, let's say, propagandizing global warming or black holes gives you money and power and, like, positions and degrees, then surely you would do that because that increases your power, right? Even if you don't believe in it, let's say, or whatever, you know, you get what I mean, hopefully. So it is rational in this broader sense, but in a narrower sense of, like, rational inquiry or inquiry, I don't know, it is irrational, right? So all these ideals of, you know, academic freedom, like openness, like scientific discourse, like careful study of the arguments, ad hominem attacks and stuff, it all goes out of the window immediately as soon as, like, real science starts, you know, actually real without air quotes, real science. I mean, the science as it is actually done, right? Factually in the real world. So it all goes out the window, and at best, in real world, factually, rationality is only used to justify irrational behavior. Like, you have some motivations which are naturally irrational, like, you know, all the instincts, all the necessities, and will to power is inherently irrational, you might argue, which stands behind all of this, in my opinion. I still claim that. So all of this is irrational, and science is just like sugar coats it, you know, it's just like a skin suit around all of this, right, to cover it. So to only justify like sophistically whatever you would have done anyways, right, something like that. So yeah, and so inherently mind in science is still working on irrational rails, because it's being used to propagate whatever irrational things are being done, just to make them look like they come from a rational source, right? Something like that. Okay. Yeah. And one interesting illustration of my general point might be found in a very recent paper, which again I'll link in the description, where, well, I wouldn't actually like quote you the paper or anything. I'll just give you a general conclusion that the authors arrived at, is that genes that are rarely used in an organism, I mean, tend to mutate more than the genes that are used frequently. It's kind of an ongoing research, this whole topic, so it's pretty unclear at the moment what's going on, but it's just the result of the study, right? So genes that are used more mutate less. Genes that are used less mutate more. So unused genes sort of are, well, in a way, are trying to be more useful, so they're trying to mutate more. I don't know, like something happens, right? But what is sufficient for me, for the purpose of this discussion, is that genes that are used less tend to mutate more, okay? And already a couple of caveats. Well, firstly, we're talking about genes. So I'm gonna generalize it to like general life, right? Life as a natural phenomenon, not just genes. That's one big caveat. Another big caveat is that the whole study is being done on one species, one plant, right? So it's already a huge generalization as well. We don't know whether all the genes of all the organisms behave in this way, right? We just don't know that. There haven't been studies like meta-analysis of this sort being done. Nothing even close to that. So with these two caveats in mind, I'm gonna generalize it, of course, and use it as an illustration of my point. So as I've said, mind is used rarely. Well, I haven't said it here maybe, but now I'm saying it. I've actually said it, I think, in Onion of Aliens, where I talk about intelligence. I think it was part 3, but I'm not sure. It could have been part 2, but anyway, I'll link the proper part in the description. While I'm going to be editing this video, I'm going to rewatch it and link the proper part. So the mind is used rarely, only to solve new problems, like the problems that have just arisen. Like I give the example with a fly there to illustrate what the mind, what intelligence really is. So I'll give the links. Again, the mind is only used to solve new problems because old problems have already been solved by habits. So automatically, basically, it doesn't involve mind or intelligence in any way, right? It's almost like instinct, right? Habit. So yeah, so basically, like perhaps like 90% of the time of your day you spend without using your mind at all, right? You're just autopiloting, and it's completely fine. I mean, it conserves a lot of energy, and it's very efficient, etc., etc. Of course, you could argue like some things, like for example, like some bad psychological reactions could require rectifying. Like what I'm saying is, you may have bad habits which are actually detrimental to you, and it's kind of hard to readjust them sometimes, right? So yeah, maybe you need like years of psychotherapy or something like that. Sometimes that is the case, unfortunately. But yeah, overall habits are a good thing, right? Though unfortunately sometimes they aren't. All right. Yeah, that's probably yeah. And returning to this paper, so again, uber generalizing, genes that are used rarely mutate more. The mind is used rarely, hence the mind is kind of very volatile, you know, it kind of mutable, it kind of dangerous, you know. That's what I mean, basically, to illustrate my main point, that the mind is a very, very dangerous kind of place. Very, very powerful, but very vulnerable to any sort of, you know, interference. So yeah. mind essentially is an extension of a body, or if you don't prefer to think of just a body, which is perfectly fine with me, or let's say of a living being, and not vice versa, right? Mind is an extension of a living being, and not vice versa. Yet the mind can subdue or even undo the living being under certain circumstances. Yeah. So it shows how, again, volatile and, well, dangerous it is, ultimately. Okay. So speaking about, like, mutations of genes versus mutability of a mind, to a degree, you might say that a culture in its development is, in a way, a process of mutation of mind, so to speak, in a way, right? And it's really good that in culture we have a buffer of tradition, which sort of plays a role of habits. So, if you wish, this is my big analogy, one of the many, right? That for culture, tradition is the same as habits for a mind, right? So it plays a role of a certain buffer that doesn't allow you to, like, fall into chaos, sort of. It keeps it somewhat stable, the culture, I mean, the tradition keeps the culture stable. Because, and we're kind of coming to an end of this video already, of course, having an open mind and bloody blah blah is very cool, right? Nobody argues against that. But at the same time, I would claim that freely wandering mind without any anchors whatsoever is like a legit portal to hell, like to a, you know, again, Event Horizon type of chaos. Event Horizon is a movie, FYI. Again, I keep recommending it to everyone because the idea is so brilliant, and it's such a shame they've cut out those juicy scenes. Like, you can read about the sad story of how this movie was made. Like, all the fancy stuff was well, basically edited out, unfortunately. But there's still enough remaining that it's still very cool. So yeah, a freely wandering mind is a genuine portal to hell and madness and chaos, honestly. And if you are to exercise an open and freely wandering mind, you will have to deal with, I mean, it kind of sounds pretentious and kind of pompous. I don't know if that's the word. But yeah, you will have to take responsibility, I guess, to, like, containing all those demons that you will free with this wandering of yours inside of yourself, so that they will destroy you and not the world around you. Alright, because that's a legitimate possibility as well. Again, returning to the very beginning, because the mind it's a very new acquisition and it's very dangerous. And it's very powerful at the same time, right? Okay, I guess that will be all. So let's conclude this rant. Here we talked about firstly the concept of glass cannon, which I've described as, well, it's not my invention, obviously. I'm just referencing the cultural trope, if you wish, which is that the glass cannon is something very powerful but very vulnerable, right? Long story short. I've made a claim that the mind, the intelligence or intellect, is a glass cannon. It's very powerful but very vulnerable, and it's also a new acquisition for living beings, at least on this planet. And hence it's doubly vulnerable, and because it's untested, and it's doubly dangerous because of that. So it's like, it's a very, very spicy cocktail of being like untested, powerful, and vulnerable, right? Like it speaks of disaster coming, right? Something like that. It's also kind of tragic, but for other reasons. Yeah, well, that's pretty much the whole video in a nutshell, right? So I've just ruminated on other things, like this quote from Inception, which says that the idea is a parasite, where I claim, well, mind is a perfect medium for any parasite because, again, of all these traits I've listed. I've given you examples of the recent events which illustrate my point really well, I believe. Then we talked about how naive ideals of rationality doesn't work. Then we talked about this new paper, which I've used as an illustration to my point. And then we talked a little bit about culture, how it can be somewhat analogous to a human being. Well, actually, like any living being, where I've made an analogy between tradition and culture and habits in human beings, for example. All right. I mean, I could have expanded on this some more and given you some more examples. I mean, with regards to culture, how it changes and how tradition tries to keep it safe in a way. But I guess it's self-evident, so this general point would be enough. And I'm not making any moralistic statements here, by the way. I'm not saying that change is bad or tradition is bad. No, I'm kind of completely neutral here. I'm just stating what's happening, or at least what I think is happening. That would be more fair assessment. Okay, so I actually see I've been pretty quick with this video, which means I would still have time and a bit of energy to record a couple of shorter videos, which for now I think would be exclusively on Patreon. Like, I wouldn't even post them on my YouTube channel, at least maybe for a couple of months. I don't know, we shall see. But I'm gonna record them right now, when I'm gonna say farewell to you, which I'm gonna do right now. Okay, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.